Welcome, history explorers. Today we wander along the silent desert roads of the great Persian Empire. Imagine the soft golden sands stretching endlessly, ancient caravans tracing paths long forgotten, and the whispers of kings and their secrets carried gently by the desert wind. Let these calm stories guide you, relaxing your mind as you drift into a peaceful sleep. If you enjoy this journey through time, softly tap like and subscribe, so we can share more serene tales together. Now, step quietly with me onto these silent desert roads. The desert breathes slowly under a pale sky where the sun rises without urgency, casting long golden shadows across endless waves of sand and stone. And in this quiet stillness, the earliest echoes of the Persian world begin to unfold, not with thunder or conquest, but with patience, observation, and the gentle rhythm of survival, as small tribes once moved carefully between mountains and dry valleys searching for water, grazing land, and shelter from harsh winds, learning to read the language of stars, clouds, and distant hills, building simple fires at night that glowed like small islands of warmth in a vast ocean of darkness. And around these fires, stories were spoken softly, not to impress, but to comfort, shaping memory into tradition. And in those early generations, life followed predictable patterns of sunrise, travel, rest, and renewal, where time felt slower, measured not by clocks, but by shadows stretching across stone. And gradually these scattered groups learned cooperation, forming bonds through shared trade, shared defense, and shared rituals that honored light, fire, and order. And as centuries drifted forward, the land itself shaped the mindset of its people, teaching endurance, patience, and respect for structure, until leadership emerged not through spectacle but through reliability. And among these early leaders, Cyrus the Great became a steady center, known not for cruelty but for organization, tolerance, and calm authority. And his leadership unified diverse communities into a single framework that valued stability over chaos, allowing roads to be formed not merely as pathways but as veins connecting distant settlements, slowly transforming isolated regions into a connected realm where messages, goods, and ideas traveled at the pace of camels and human footsteps. And these early desert roads were quiet corridors of dust and wind, where travelers listened more than they spoke, observing changing skies, distant mirages, and the rhythm of their own breathing. And each journey was an act of patience, reinforcing a culture that respected long horizons rather than immediate rewards. And as the Persian realm expanded gradually, governance followed clear structure rather than force, dividing territories into manageable regions overseen by administrators who maintained records, taxes, and infrastructure, ensuring consistency and predictability across wide distances. And this administrative calm allowed cities to develop with measured growth, where markets unfolded each morning with familiar routines of exchange, where spices, grains, textiles, and metals changed hands without urgency, and the soundscape remained gentle, dominated by footsteps, murmured negotiations, and distant animal bells rather than chaos. And architecture mirrored this calm efficiency, with stone platforms, columned halls, and orderly layouts designed for durability rather than extravagance, reflecting a worldview that favored longevity and balance. And religion integrated seamlessly into daily rhythm, honoring light and truth through simple rituals centered around fire temples that glowed steadily rather than dramatically, symbolizing continuity rather than spectacle. And these rituals anchored community identity while reinforcing ethical values such as honesty, discipline, and respect for order. And as generations passed, these systems matured into a stable empire that stretched across deserts, plains, and mountains, connected by the famous Royal Road, which allowed couriers to travel with consistent pacing, stopping at relay stations where fresh animals and rest awaited, creating a predictable flow of communication that strengthened administrative cohesion, while preserving the slow tempo of desert life. And along these routes, caravans moved steadily, their shadows stretching across sand at dawn and dusk, forming lines of motion that seemed almost timeless. And travelers learned to appreciate silence as a companion, using it to reflect, conserve energy, and maintain awareness of the environment. And this cultivated a cultural temperament inclined toward patience and inward focus, rather than impulsiveness. And daily life unfolded with gentle repetition, waking before the sun, preparing modest meals, tending animals, repairing tools, exchanging news, resting during the hottest hours, and resuming activity as evening cooled the air. And seasons shifted gradually, teaching adaptation rather than resistance, and children absorbed knowledge through observation, watching elders navigate terrain, negotiate trades, and maintain household rhythms, embedding continuity across generations, and even governance followed slow cycles of reporting, review, and adjustment rather than rapid change, allowing stability to accumulate quietly. And as the empire encountered neighboring cultures through trade rather than conflict, diversity enriched rather than destabilized, integrating customs, crafts, and ideas without disrupting the foundational order. And this blend of cultures created layered identities that felt expansive, yet grounded. And nightfall in Persian settlements remained peaceful, with lamps glowing softly, conversations fading into silence, and stars dominating the sky, reinforcing a sense of scale and humility before the vast universe. And this nightly stillness reinforced emotional equilibrium, preparing minds and bodies for rest. Mirroring the slow, breathing rhythm that modern listeners associate with relaxation. And even during periods of challenge or external pressure, the Persian approach emphasized measured response rather than urgency, maintaining long-term perspective that valued sustainability over immediate gain. And as centuries progressed and leadership transitioned through different rulers, the administrative skeleton remained intact, preserving consistency across changing personalities, and roads continued to carry merchants, pilgrims, scholars, and messengers through silent deserts, where wind sculpted dunes slowly over years, reminding travelers that time itself moves gently when observed patiently. And these roads became symbols not only of connectivity but of meditative motion, where repetition of footsteps and wheel tracks lulled travelers into reflective calm, and many described journeys not as effort, but as extended contemplation. And even today, the remnants of these routes evoke quiet endurance rather than drama, whispering stories of countless ordinary lives rather than singular heroic moments. And as the empire eventually encountered transformation through external influence and internal evolution, its core legacy remained embedded in systems of organization, tolerance, infrastructure, and disciplined calm, influencing later civilizations and shaping concepts of governance and logistics that persist quietly beneath modern complexity. Empires rise and fall, the desert remains constant, breathing slowly beneath changing skies, preserving echoes of footsteps that once crossed its surface with patience and intention. And this continuity invites modern listeners to mentally walk alongside those ancient travelers, synchronizing breath with imagined camel steps, letting the mind settle into steady rhythm, releasing urgency and distraction, and allowing thought to drift gently as history unfolds, not as spectacle, but as a steady stream of human persistence. And in this gentle narrative, there is no need for tension or climax, only the reassurance of continuity, order, and quiet endurance, where each grain of sand contributes to a landscape that evolves imperceptibly yet consistently, and where the legacy of the Persian Empire survives less in monuments than in the philosophy of slow structure, disciplined patience, and respect for natural rhythms, offering a timeless invitation to slow the mind, soften awareness, and rest within the calm flow of long history, allowing sleep to arrive gradually, like twilight descending over silent desert roads. The desert remains patient as morning light spreads slowly across distant ridges and flat plains, revealing pathways shaped not by urgency, but by repetition. And these pathways gradually matured into structured routes that carried the quiet pulse of the Persian Empire forward, not as dramatic highways, but as disciplined lines of movement, where travelers learned to trust distance, routine, and measured endurance. And as administrative order strengthened under rulers such as Darius, the empire refined its systems with deliberate precision, dividing territories into satrapies that balanced authority with accountability, allowing information, taxation, and local customs to coexist without friction. And this balance created a predictable environment where commerce flowed steadily rather than explosively, reinforcing social stability and psychological calm. And the royal road extended across vast geography like a slow-moving artery, connecting mountains, fertile valleys, and desert expanses, enabling messengers to travel with consistency while preserving the tranquil tempo of long-distance travel. And relay stations appeared at regular intervals, offering water, shelter, and fresh animals, creating a rhythm of pause and continuation that mirrored natural breathing cycles, and travelers came to rely on these predictable stops, easing mental strain and encouraging steady pacing rather than exhaustion. And each station became a quiet node of human exchange, where brief greetings, simple meals, and silent rest blended into the surrounding stillness. And the desert air carried subtle scents of dust, leather, grain, and smoke, blending into a sensory background that soothed rather than stimulated, and caravans advanced in orderly lines, guided by experienced leaders who understood wind patterns, temperature shifts, and celestial navigation, and these leaders rarely raised their voices, preferring gestures and familiar signals that conserved energy and reduced unnecessary disturbance. And silence itself became a form of communication, conveying safety, alertness, and mutual respect. And as trade networks expanded, goods moved calmly across the empire, carrying fabrics from distant valleys, spices from warm regions, metals from rocky uplands, and grains from fertile plains. And each exchange strengthened economic consistency, rather than excess accumulation, reinforcing a culture that valued reliability over abundance. And markets reflected this temperament, opening at sunrise with predictable arrangements of stalls, weighed measures, patient negotiations, and orderly departures, where voices remained low and movements deliberate, and customers followed habitual paths through familiar vendors, building trust through repetition rather than novelty. And children observed these routines and absorbed them naturally, learning patience as a practical skill rather than a lesson, and artisans worked methodically, shaping clay, metal, wood, and textiles with steady hands, guided by years of incremental refinement rather than rushed innovation. And their workshops carried soft, rhythmic sounds that blended seamlessly into the ambient quiet of the settlement, reinforcing a sense of calm productivity. And architecture continued to prioritize durability, symmetry, and functional clarity, with stone foundations, shaded corridors, and open courtyards designed to regulate temperature and airflow, reducing discomfort and encouraging rest during the hottest hours. And water management systems reflected advanced planning, using channels, reservoirs, and underground pathways to distribute limited resources efficiently without waste, reinforcing a mindset of conservation and foresight. And households followed simple routines that synchronized with natural cycles, rising early, completing essential tasks before midday heat, resting during peak temperatures, and resuming activity as evening brought cooling air. And meals were modest yet nourishing, emphasizing grains, fruits, dairy, and preserved foods that supported consistent energy rather than indulgence. And this dietary simplicity further stabilized daily rhythm and physical well-being, and religious practices blended seamlessly into these routines, with fire temples serving as quiet centers of reflection rather than dramatic gathering points, where steady flames symbolized continuity, truth, and discipline. And individuals paused briefly to acknowledge these symbols before returning to their tasks, reinforcing inner order without interruption. And this integration of belief into daily life reduced psychological conflict and promoted emotional equilibrium. And education occurred organically through observation and repetition, with elders demonstrating skills rather than delivering formal instruction, allowing learning to unfold gradually and naturally. And storytelling preserved historical memory without exaggeration, emphasizing continuity, moral consistency, and respect for inherited knowledge. And as the empire matured, diplomatic relationships expanded alongside trade routes, enabling peaceful cultural exchange that enriched crafts, language, and administrative practices without destabilizing core values. And foreign visitors often remarked on the measured calm of Persian settlements, noting the absence of chaos and the prevalence of orderly motion. And this reputation strengthened trust across borders, encouraging stable, long-term partnerships rather than volatile alliances. And nighttime reinforced this cultural calm, as lamps illuminated pathways softly. Voices faded into murmurs, and stars dominated the sky, offering visual stillness that encouraged reflection and rest. And families gathered briefly before sleep, sharing simple observations rather than intense discussion, allowing minds to settle naturally. And this nightly ritual reinforced emotional grounding and continuity across generations. And even when seasonal challenges arrived, such as drought, dust storms, or temporary shortages, response strategies emphasized conservation, collective support, and incremental adjustment rather than panic. And this adaptive resilience further strengthened psychological stability across communities. And as years unfolded into decades, and decades into centuries, the Royal Road continued its steady service, carrying messengers who memorized distances and relay schedules with precision, allowing governance to remain synchronized across vast territory without accelerating tempo. And the repetition of these journeys created meditative familiarity, where each bend, station, and horizon line became predictable landmarks in a mental map of calm continuity. And travelers often describe their movement as drifting rather than traveling, aligning breath and thought with the slow rhythm of steps and hoofbeats. And this gentle motion supported introspection, allowing individuals to process memory, intention, and observation without mental strain. And these experiences gradually shaped a cultural identity rooted in patience, order, and understated endurance, rather than spectacle or conquest. And as external pressures occasionally touched the empire's borders, internal systems absorbed stress without destabilization, demonstrating the strength of gradual institutional development over impulsive expansion. And leadership transitions maintained continuity through established administrative frameworks, rather than personality-driven shifts, preserving predictability for ordinary citizens. And even taxation and record-keeping followed standardized schedules and formats that minimized uncertainty and confusion, reinforcing trust and governance. And over time, the empire's influence extended beyond territorial control into philosophical legacy, demonstrating that infrastructure, tolerance, and measured organization could sustain stability across diverse populations. And while later historical shifts eventually transformed political boundaries, the conceptual imprint of these systems persisted quietly within subsequent civilizations, influencing trade logistics, road construction, administrative decentralization, and cultural integration practices. And the desert itself remained an enduring witness, slowly reshaping dunes with wind, while preserving the memory of countless footsteps that once crossed its surface in calm procession. And when modern imagination traces these routes mentally, it encounters not drama, but rhythm, not conflict, but continuity, inviting the listener to slow breathing, relax attention, and drift into a tranquil mental journey alongside ancient caravans moving steadily beneath expansive skies. And in this gentle unfolding of long history, there is no urgency, only the reassurance that human systems can harmonize with natural pacing when guided by patience, foresight, and respect for order, allowing the mind to rest within steady progression as sleep approaches gradually, like evening shadows extending across silent desert roads. The desert settles into a deeper rhythm as daylight stretches across open plains and distant hills. And within this quiet continuity, the inner life of Persian cities unfolds not as spectacle but as patterned movement guided by habit, climate, and collective memory. And these cities were never designed to overwhelm the senses. Instead, they favored balanced spacing, shaded walkways, and gentle transitions between public and private spaces that allowed the mind to remain relaxed while navigating daily tasks. And walls built from stone and sun-dried brick absorbed heat slowly, releasing warmth gradually as evening arrived, creating a stable indoor environment that supported consistent rest and comfort. And courtyards functioned as silent centers where light filtered through narrow openings and small fountains murmured softly, blending water sound with warm air movement and a calming sensory balance. And residents moved through these spaces with unhurried familiarity, recognizing footsteps, door patterns, and shifting light angles as subtle markers of time rather than relying on mechanical measurement. And morning began quietly as doors opened one by one, sweeping dust from thresholds, feeding animals, and preparing simple meals. And the smell of bread baking and tea warming drifted gently through narrow streets without sharp contrast. And vendors arranged goods carefully rather than hurriedly, aligning baskets, jars, and claws with consistent symmetry that pleased the eye and reinforced predictability. And customers approached with patient expectation rather than impulse, trusting routine supply rather than sudden opportunity. And this habitual exchange fostered emotional stability across the community. And as sunlight strengthened, artisans resumed their measured craft, shaping pottery with slow-turning wheels, polishing metal with repetitive strokes, weaving textiles in steady patterns that mirrored breathing rhythm. And these crafts were not rushed toward novelty, but refined incrementally across generations, reinforcing mastery through patience rather than innovation through urgency, and apprentices learned by observation and repetition, absorbing muscle memory gradually until movements became effortless and calm. And this method of knowledge transfer strengthened intergenerational continuity and reduced performance anxiety. And midday brought deliberate rest as heat intensified, and households withdrew into shaded interiors or courtyards, resting quietly, conserving energy, and allowing the nervous system to settle naturally, and conversations softened into murmurs or silence, and children learned to recognize this pause as a respected part of daily rhythm rather than boredom, and elders reflected silently, often gazing toward light patterns or listening to faint ambient sounds, reinforcing mindfulness long before the concept was formalized, and water distribution followed predictable schedules through channels and reservoirs that ensured equitable access without competition, reinforcing collective trust and reducing conflict, and maintenance crews inspected pathways, walls, and drainage quietly, addressing minor wear before it accumulated, reflecting a preventative mindset that favored long-term stability over short-term reaction. And as afternoon cooled, activity resumed gently, with light commerce, social visits, and shared preparation for evening meals, and families gathered with minimal stimulation, sharing nourishment and simple observations rather than dramatic storytelling, allowing digestion and relaxation to proceed naturally. And twilight softened the city into muted tones as lamps illuminated corridors gradually, avoiding abrupt sensory shifts that could disrupt rest. And night brought a return to stillness, where the sounds of distant footsteps, occasional animal movement, and wind against stone blended into a consistent ambient field that supported deep sleep. And this predictable cycle repeated across seasons, subtly adjusting to daylight length and temperature while maintaining core rhythm, reinforcing a sense of security and continuity that stabilized emotional health. And beyond domestic life, administrative functions operated with similar calm structure, with record keepers documenting trade, population, and resource flow using standardized formats that minimized confusion and preserved clarity across time. And messengers arrived with predictable intervals rather than urgent interruption, allowing information to integrate smoothly into governance without triggering stress responses. And councils reviewed matters methodically, prioritizing incremental improvement rather than dramatic reform. And this governance style reinforced citizen trust and reduced societal volatility. And education remained embedded in everyday practice, with children learning geography by accompanying elders on short journeys, arithmetic through market transactions, learning ethics through observation of fairness and consistency, and learning patience through repetition of daily tasks. And storytelling preserved memory without exaggeration, focusing on continuity of values rather than individual heroism, reinforcing collective identity rather than personal ambition. And cultural festivals occurred with measured tone rather than excess, emphasizing seasonal change, agricultural cycles, and gratitude rather than spectacle, allowing emotional uplift without overstimulation. And music favored slow tempos and simple melodies that complemented natural rhythm rather than dominating attention, supporting relaxation and social cohesion. And visitors from distant regions often remarked on the absence of crowding, shouting, or aggressive bargaining, observing instead a soft flow of movement and conversation that resembled a living organism, maintaining internal balance. And this impression reinforced the reputation of Persian cities as places of stability rather than intensity, attracting traders and scholars who valued predictability and safety. And even defensive infrastructure reflected restraint, focusing on deterrence and organization rather than aggressive display, reinforcing internal calm while maintaining external security. And as decades passed, generations inherited this lifestyle as normal rather than exceptional, internalizing calm pacing as default perception of time. And psychological resilience developed naturally through consistent routine rather than deliberate training. Occasional disruptions occurred, such as storms, shortages, or administrative transitions. Recovery followed established procedures that restored equilibrium gradually rather than abruptly, preventing long-term stress accumulation. And the desert surrounding these cities reinforced perspective by offering vast, silent space beyond structured settlements, reminding residents of scale, impermanence, and continuity simultaneously. and many individuals found quiet comfort in gazing toward distant horizons, allowing thoughts to soften and attention to widen, a natural precursor to restful states of mind. And as night deepened, stars traced predictable arcs across the sky, serving as both navigation reference and emotional anchor, reinforcing reliability of natural cycles. And listeners imagining these scenes may synchronize breathing unconsciously with these slow patterns, allowing muscular tension to release and mental chatter to diminish. And the narrative itself mirrors these rhythms by avoiding sharp transitions, guiding awareness gently rather than directing it forcefully. And within this steady flow, the lived experience of Persian city life becomes less a historical abstraction and more a sensory environment that invites rest, continuity, and quiet reflection. And this atmosphere prepares the foundation for understanding broader trade networks, cultural exchange, and the silent roads that connected these calm centers across vast landscapes, forming the next layer of slow historical movement that continues to unfold gently beyond the city walls. The royal road stretched like a measured line across mountains, plains, and deserts, its surface softened by dust and time, carrying not haste but rhythm. And along this quiet artery, merchants and travelers moved with deliberate pacing, camels stepping steadily, wheels turning slowly, and human feet following a pattern learned through repetition. And each traveler carried not only goods but awareness, listening to wind, observing shifting dunes, noting distant horizons, internalizing the vast scale and stillness of the environment. And this awareness allowed journeys to unfold as meditation, where each step synchronized with breath, thoughts drifting gently like clouds. And along the road, small relay stations appeared at consistent intervals, providing water, shelter, and fresh animals, offering both physical and psychological pause that reinforced the calm structure of the empire. And messengers delivered information on fixed schedules, their presence expected, their arrival unnoticed, except for the steady movement of life. And these stations became nodes of soft human interaction, where greetings were whispered, meals taken quietly, and rest given priority, maintaining energy and focus without excitement or urgency. And the desert itself shaped perception, teaching patience through slow change, emphasizing continuity over novelty, and travelers internalized these lessons, carrying them back to settlements where daily life already emphasized rhythm and predictability. And as caravans moved, the cargo included spices, metals, textiles, grains, and messages, all flowing without rush, embedded in habitual routines that reinforced social cohesion and emotional calm. And the empire's governance reflected the same measured logic, with satraps overseeing regions with clear reporting channels, tax collection, legal consistency, and infrastructure maintenance all proceeding according to slow, dependable schedules. And this predictability strengthened public trust and minimized stress, allowing communities to thrive quietly. And during long journeys across deserts, travelers relied on observation and experience, noting sand shifts, distant mountains, and the positions of stars, integrating natural cues into mental maps that allowed safe navigation without urgency. And silence became an essential companion, conveying attentiveness and reducing cognitive load, while conversation remained soft, conserving energy and preserving calm. And children traveling with elders absorbed these rhythms as a natural state of being, learning to synchronize attention, movement, and emotion with external cues. And this gradual education instilled resilience, patience, and steady judgment, skills that were crucial in an empire spanning vast and diverse landscapes. And trade networks expanded across regions without requiring dramatic intervention, relying instead on repeated practices, agreements, and shared expectations that created consistency, reducing risk, and allowing merchants and leaders alike to plan confidently for the long term. And these repeated journeys through desert, mountain, and plain reinforced a cultural identity rooted in slow motion, thoughtful action, and disciplined endurance, where accomplishment was measured in completion of cycle rather than conquest. And the royal road itself symbolized not only logistical success, but also philosophical continuity, a tangible reminder that persistence, rhythm, and measured planning outlasted impulsive effort. And as travelers rested at stations or settlements along the route, the landscape encouraged reflection, observation, and mindfulness, reinforcing emotional balance and providing a natural prelude to sleep. And settlements remained intentionally calm, with stone buildings absorbing heat gradually, courtyards offering shaded reprieve, and streets organized for flow rather than spectacle. reinforcing the sensory principle of low stimulation. Daily routines remain stable, with meals simple yet sustaining, chores methodical, craft practice steadily, and religious and cultural rituals emphasizing continuity, order, and ethical consistency, all contributing to a predictable, calming experience. Night brought predictable transitions as lamps illuminated pathways softly, conversations quieted, animals rested, and stars dominated the sky, forming fixed patterns that anchored awareness, reinforced trust in natural cycles, and supported restful states. Administrative systems functioned quietly alongside these rhythms, record keeping, resource allocation, and legal procedures unfolding incrementally, with problems addressed calmly and gradually, rather than impulsively, preserving internal stability. Even during seasons of drought or regional disruption, established practices ensured that recovery followed measured steps, avoiding sudden upheaval. This long-term stability fostered a sense of security, continuity, and temporal awareness that deeply influenced daily life, personal expectation, and cultural identity. The empire's subtle integration of governance, trade, infrastructure, and habit demonstrated that scale and complexity could coexist with calmness, patience, and resilience, forming a legacy not in spectacle, but in enduring systems that harmonized with human behavior and natural rhythm. And travelers moving along these roads experienced a slow rhythm of distance, rest, observation, and reflection, internalizing endurance and steady pacing as central principles, while silent deserts surrounding the settlements reminded them of vastness, permanence, and the quiet flow of time. And this environment supported the emergence of wisdom, measured decision-making, and inner calm which persisted across generations, embedding psychological resilience alongside material infrastructure. And children, apprentices, and new residents learned to inhabit these spaces not as extraordinary, but as normal, integrating quiet observation, repetition, and rhythm into daily life, internalizing patterns that became second nature. And as night deepened along the royal road, winds stirred sand softly, stars rotated predictably, lamps flickered gently, animals breathed evenly, and travelers rested in tents or stations, absorbing the total calm of the environment. And this habitual exposure to rhythmic motion, sensory predictability, and environmental consistency provided both physical and mental recovery, reinforcing endurance, attention, and subtle awareness. And within these patterns, the empire's reach and function continued smoothly, expanding influence, trade, and culture without abrupt stress or agitation. And lessons of continuity, rhythm, and patient observation were communicated across generations, forming a psychological legacy as strong as material artifacts. And as observers imagined these long, silent journeys through deserts, the repetition of footfalls, wheel turns, and camel steps, the distant glimmer of fires, the soft murmur of conversation, and the predictable progression of dawn and dusk induce relaxed breathing, slow heart rate, and mental drift, guiding consciousness gently toward rest. And in this space, human activity is no longer dramatic, but a meditation, a seamless procession through time that teaches endurance, stability, and tranquility, offering modern listeners the experience of walking slowly alongside ancient caravans on the royal road, absorbing centuries of calm, continuity, and careful planning. And in this integration of human rhythm, natural environment, and structural organization lies the essence of Persian legacy, not in conquest, spectacle, or fame, but in persistent, steady systems, reflective practice, measured governance, and quiet endurance, demonstrating that true strength can reside in patience, repetition, and the gentle unfolding of history, allowing the mind to release tension, synchronize with slow motion, and drift naturally into rest along silent desert roads. As the Persian Empire matured, life along its roads and within its cities became a study in measured rhythm, where the ordinary unfolded with quiet precision, and the mundane gained subtle significance through repetition and predictability. And caravans continued their slow progression across deserts, mountains, and valleys, the movement itself a form of meditation, each camel step echoing against sand and stone, each wheel turning predictably, each traveler adjusting breathing to the cadence of travel, and children accompanying elders observed, internalizing rhythm, patience, and observation as fundamental skills, learning to read the landscape, sky, and distant horizons without haste. And towns and settlements along these routes developed in parallel with careful planning, streets laid out to minimize confusion and maximize ease of movement, homes constructed with durable materials that moderated temperature naturally, courtyards providing shaded respite during the hottest hours, fountains and water channels murmuring softly, blending utility with gentle sensory experience, and markets opened with predictable layout, each stall familiar, each product positioned consistently, negotiation conducted quietly, voices low, movement controlled, reflecting the broader cultural emphasis on predictability and calm, and artisans worked in shops or courtyards, crafting pottery, metalwork, textiles, and wood with careful, repetitive motions, practiced over years to achieve efficiency, skill, and internal calm, and apprentices observed these gestures, absorbing technique and philosophy, learning that mastery was achieved through patient accumulation rather than sudden genius, and daily routines reinforced stability, meals prepared and eaten slowly, chores completed in measured steps, work paused during midday heat and resumed as temperatures cooled, allowing energy to align with environmental rhythm, and religious practice integrated seamlessly, fire temples glowing steadily, rituals performed without hurry, instilling ethical principles and inner balance without dramatic ceremony, and these rituals provided both social cohesion and personal reflection, grounding inhabitants in predictable cycles, reinforcing continuity across generations, and as night descended, lamps illuminated pathways softly, shadows lengthening slowly, families gathered quietly, conversations hushed, animals resting, and the stars rose in fixed patterns, anchoring perception and creating a backdrop of cosmic constancy, and the royal road itself served as a constant thread, linking settlements and stations, enabling movement of goods, ideas, and people with remarkable consistency, relay stations offering water, shelter, and fresh mounts, predictable in timing and spacing, fostering both confidence and psychological ease among travelers, and as caravans moved steadily, commerce unfolded, gently, transporting grains, textiles, metals, and spices along established routines. Exchange conducted with low voices, steady hands, and minimal disruption, reinforcing trust, security, and emotional equilibrium. And the administrative apparatus mirrored these rhythms, satraps reporting methodically, taxes collected and recorded with precision, legal matters addressed gradually, infrastructure maintained through scheduled inspection and repair, all processes favoring consistency over dramatic change, and these habits ensured that governance remained resilient, predictable, and calming. And when disruptions occurred, whether due to weather, shortage, or regional disturbance, response followed measured, well-established steps, restoring balance incrementally rather than abruptly, reinforcing communal trust and preserving mental calm. And the desert surrounding settlements acted as both challenge and teacher, vast and unchanging, shaping awareness, patience, and perspective, reminding travelers and residents alike of scale, impermanence, and continuity. And those who moved along the desert roads learned to integrate observation, endurance, and mindfulness into daily life, aligning internal rhythm with external environment, cultivating steady attention and reflective thought. And trade networks flourished quietly under these conditions, not through aggressive competition, but through reliable routes, predictable markets, and consistent standards, allowing both economic and cultural exchange to develop sustainably, enriching the empire without destabilizing internal order. And education remained embedded in daily life, children learning geography by walking routes, arithmetic by counting goods, ethics by watching interactions, skills by imitation and repetition, without urgency, stress, or spectacle, embedding patience, resilience, and disciplined attention as foundational traits. And storytelling emphasized continuity over heroism, the slow accumulation of knowledge over sudden triumphs, preserving the lessons of generations and the subtle wisdom of endurance. And cultural practices and festivals reflected the same moderation, timed with seasons and agricultural cycles, celebrating renewal and gratitude rather than spectacle. Music favored slow rhythms, gentle melodies, and minimal ornamentation, supporting social cohesion, relaxation, and mindful awareness. And as night deepened along the royal road, travelers rested in predictable rhythm, lamps casting soft light, stars rising steadily overhead, winds whispering across dunes, and the ambient soundscape reinforcing mental calm, preparing body and mind for sleep. And observers of this world would notice that life, while expansive and complex, functioned with minimal drama, maximum continuity, and abundant repetition, creating a psychological and emotional environment that prioritized endurance, predictability, and slow accumulation over impulsive achievement. And these practices shaped character across generations, embedding slow perception, measured response, and reflective awareness, while the natural landscape reinforced these qualities through subtle, persistent cues. And even as centuries passed, leadership transitioned gradually, administrative systems maintained continuity, infrastructure endured, trade networks persisted, and cultural principles of rhythm, patience, and calm absorbed change without losing coherence, creating a legacy less in monuments or conquest, and more in the pervasive, internalized order that guided human thought, behavior, and community life. And those walking silently along desert roads, observing repeated patterns, predictable intervals, and the interplay of human and environmental rhythm, experienced a meditative journey where attention softened, breath slowed, muscles released tension, and consciousness drifted gently in time with the world, internalizing lessons of endurance, patience, and structured continuity. And as settlements rested beneath night skies, and the royal road remained a measured link between them, the calm pulse of the empire persisted invisibly, a living network of quiet systems, guiding movement, thought, trade, and governance, and reminding all who participated that the strength of civilization need not rely on spectacle, drama, or urgency, but could thrive through patient accumulation, consistent action, and reverence for rhythm, scale, and order, providing both material sustenance and mental calm, allowing bodies to recover, minds to release tension, and consciousness to rest as naturally as dusk descends across silent deserts, each star overhead marking time with gentle constancy, each camel step reflecting centuries of learned endurance, and each resting lamp reminding travelers and residents alike that peace and stability arise from slow, deliberate practice, repetition, and integration with natural cycles, forming a legacy of human life that moves quietly, steadily, and enduringly through time, preparing modern listeners to align breath, slow thought, and attention with the same calm cadence, drifting gently into rest, sleep, and the soothing continuum of history itself. As the Persian Empire continued to span vast deserts, fertile valleys, and rugged mountains, the rhythm of daily life remained a quiet thread that held society together. And along the royal road, caravans maintained a slow, measured pace. Each step of the camel, each rotation of the wheel, each footfall of the traveler, aligning with the subtle cadence of the environment, teaching awareness and patience, and the desert itself offered lessons in endurance, scale, and permanence, shaping the perception of all who moved within it. And relay stations punctuated the distance like regular breaths, offering water, shade, and temporary rest, and travelers synchronized their energy with these pauses, internalizing the slow, meditative nature of movement across long stretches of sand and stone. And merchants transported grains, textiles, metals, and spices with predictable repetition, each exchange reinforcing trust, social cohesion, and the sense that effort need not be rushed to yield result. And towns and settlements maintained stability through architectural design, where streets were laid with intent, houses built to moderate climate, courtyards providing gentle respite, fountains murmuring softly, shadows shifting gradually, and light filtered through openings slowly, providing sensory predictability that nurtured calm, and markets opened predictably, stalls arranged consistently, merchants and customers moving with quiet purpose, voices low, hands steady, and children observing, internalizing rhythm, patience, and order. And artisans continued work in methodical repetition, shaping clay, metal, wood, and textile into functional and aesthetically balanced objects. Movements flowing naturally, teaching apprentices skill, endurance, and calm observation. And daily routines reinforced internal stability, with tasks scheduled according to natural cycles, meals eaten slowly, work paused during midday heat, resumed in cooling air, and rest occurring naturally, supporting mental equilibrium, and religious rituals integrated seamlessly, fire temples glowing steadily, prayers performed deliberately, reinforcing ethical principles and community cohesion, providing a constant moral framework within the otherwise routine rhythm of life. And evenings descended gradually. Lamps illuminated corridors softly, shadows extended gently, conversation quieted, and animals rested, all contributing to the predictable sensory environment that prepared body and mind for sleep. And the Royal Road continued to function as the central artery connecting settlements, ensuring movement of information, trade, and culture proceeded steadily, with relay stations providing continuity and travelers aligning movement to the rhythm of the landscape, internalizing patience and reflective awareness. And administrative systems operated quietly, satraps reporting methodically, resources allocated systematically, taxes collected consistently, records maintained accurately, and minor issues addressed incrementally, reinforcing stability and trust across the empire. And even during seasonal challenges such as drought or storms, established procedures ensured gradual adaptation and recovery, reducing stress and preserving equilibrium, and education occurred through observation and repetition, children learning geography by walking routes, arithmetic by counting, goods, ethics by watching interaction, skills through imitation, integrating patience and reflection naturally, and storytelling preserved continuity of knowledge and cultural memory, emphasizing the slow accumulation of wisdom rather than dramatic events, and festivals, ceremonies, and music maintained moderation, reflecting seasonal and agricultural cycles, supporting social cohesion and psychological stability, avoiding overstimulation, and travelers resting along the Royal Road experienced a meditative journey. Each step, turn, and pause reinforcing attention, awareness, and inner calm, internalizing principles of endurance, measured action, and steady observation, and settlements across the empire benefited from these rhythms, creating communities resilient to sudden disruption, balanced in expectation, and attuned to both human and environmental cycles. And the desert surrounding all settlements served as a silent teacher, illustrating vastness, permanence, and the slow passage of time, reminding travelers of both scale and subtlety. And the stars overhead traced consistent arcs night after night, providing reference, constancy, and reassurance, while winds whispered softly across dunes, reinforcing awareness of movement, rhythm, and continuity. And through these gentle experiences, inhabitants learned that life's success lay not in haste, spectacle, or dramatic conquest, but in patience, repetition, observation, and integration with enduring natural cycles. And this philosophy shaped cultural identity, decision-making, social structure, and personal behavior across generations, embedding resilience, attentiveness, and reflective thought, simultaneously preserving emotional calm and physical balance. And as centuries passed, leadership transitioned with minimal disruption, administrative frameworks maintained consistency, infrastructure endured, and cultural principles persisted, producing a legacy measured in sustained function rather than individual glory. And even as new rulers, outside influences, or technological changes occurred, the core rhythm of Persian life remained, anchored in repetition, predictable routines, and the subtle influence of environment, creating stability across a vast, diverse empire. And as travelers imagined or experienced the journey along these silent roads, the repetition of camel steps, wheel rotations, and human movement, the predictable spacing of relay stations, the soft illumination of lamps, the slowly shifting shadows of courtyards, and the quiet sounds of animal and wind combined to produce an almost hypnotic effect, guiding attention inward, synchronizing breath with environmental rhythm, softening mental activity, and fostering a deep sense of calm. And the legacy of the empire, though partially invisible in monuments or texts, lived on in these rhythms, systems, and modes of awareness, offering modern observers the opportunity to experience the restorative qualities of historical continuity, measured human activity, and harmonization with natural cycles, allowing mind, body, and spirit to align with the slow unfolding of time, absorbing lessons of endurance, structure, and tranquility. And ultimately, these patterns prepared both ancient travelers and modern listeners for rest, reflection, and sleep, letting consciousness drift alongside centuries of human persistence, quiet industry, and the patient continuous movement of civilizations across deserts, rivers, and mountains, offering a timeless meditation on order, rhythm, and the subtle power of slow, deliberate human action, forming a complete cycle of perception, experience, and internalization that endures beyond the boundaries of recorded history. As the Persian Empire reached its mature form, the royal road remained the quiet artery of civilization, carrying not only goods, messages, and travelers, but also the subtle rhythm of human endurance, teaching those who moved along it the measured pace of life. And along these silent desert paths, caravans advanced with steady steps, each movement echoing the persistent flow of time. And the desert itself, vast, unchanging, and patient, imparted lessons in observation, resilience, and the inevitability of gradual change. And travelers learned to align breathing, attention, and thought with this natural cadence, experiencing each step as meditation, each pause as reflection, and each horizon as perspective. And settlements along these routes mirrored this philosophy, with homes absorbing sunlight slowly, courtyards offering shaded calm, fountains and water channels murmuring quietly, and streets laid with consistency that guided movement effortlessly, and markets operated with predictable layout, calm negotiation, and habitual rhythm, allowing commerce to flourish without stress. And artisans continued their steady craft, shaping clay, metal, textiles, and wood with practiced repetition, while apprentices absorbed technique, patience, and focus, internalizing the slow accumulation of skill over years rather than immediate mastery. And daily life proceeded with quiet predictability, meals prepared and consumed slowly, chores scheduled around natural cycles, rest occurring during peak heat, work resuming gently as evening cooled the air, and these patterns promoted physical well-being and emotional stability simultaneously, and religious rituals reinforced ethical continuity. Fire. Temples glowing steadily. Prayers performed deliberately, fostering reflection, moral grounding, and social cohesion without spectacle. And families gathered as dusk softened, lamps glowing gently, shadows lengthening, voices subdued, animals resting, and the stars rising in predictable patterns overhead, offering constancy and reassurance. And administrative systems operated methodically, with satraps reporting, taxes collected, records maintained, and infrastructure repaired incrementally, reinforcing trust, stability, and low-stress governance. And even when disruptions such as drought, storms, or regional challenges occurred, recovery proceeded through established steps, restoring balance gradually, embedding resilience and long-term perspective. And education unfolded organically, children learning geography, arithmetic, ethics, and craft through observation and repetition, internalizing patience, reflective thought, and enduring skills, while storytelling preserved cultural memory and the lessons of generations, emphasizing continuity over dramatic heroism, and festivals, music, and cultural ceremonies maintained moderation, celebrating seasonal cycles and social bonds, fostering psychological stability without overstimulation, and travelers resting along the royal road experienced the meditative rhythm of the empire. Each step, wheel rotation, and animal movement harmonizing with breath, thought, and environment, embedding endurance, attentiveness, and calm awareness into daily experience. And settlements across the empire, resilient and predictable, provided a stable foundation for life, education, commerce, and governance, their architecture, routines, and sensory. Environments designed to reduce stress, increase clarity, and synchronize activity with natural cycles, and the desert surrounding these communities remained a silent teacher, illustrating vastness, permanence, and the slow passage of time, reminding all who moved across it of perspective, scale, and continuity. And as the stars traced arcs night after night, winds whispered across dunes, and lamps flickered softly in settlements, the environment itself guided attention, breathing, and awareness toward calm, reflection, and rest. And across generations, leadership transitions occurred within established administrative frameworks, preserving consistency, stability, and rhythm, while trade, cultural exchange, and governance continued steadily, creating a legacy not in monuments or conquest, but in enduring systems, structured life, and the pervasive influence of measured rhythm. And even as centuries passed and political boundaries shifted, the philosophical and practical principles of the empire, patience, repetition, measured action, and harmony with natural cycles, remained embedded in human activity, influencing future civilizations, and modern imagination can trace these silent journeys, feeling the hypnotic cadence of steps, wheels, and animal movement, observing the predictable progression of stations, settlements, and courtyards, hearing the gentle ambient sounds of wind, water, and quiet conversation, and synchronizing breath and attention with this steady pulse, allowing muscles to release tension, thoughts to soften, and consciousness to drift gently into rest. And within this experience, the essence of the Persian Empire becomes tangible, not through dramatic events, but through subtle, continuous systems of movement, observation, and reflection, where rhythm, patience, and endurance shape not only civilization but the very perception of time and self. And travelers and listeners alike absorb these lessons of calm, structure, and continuity, restorative qualities of slow, deliberate motion, repetition, and integration with natural cycles. And in this final reflection, the story concludes not with a climax, but with the enduring meditation of human persistence, quiet industry, and measured life, leaving the mind aligned with rhythm, relaxed, and ready to drift fully into sleep, carried along the silent desert roads beneath steadfast stars, through centuries of human experience, and across the vast, patient landscapes of enduring history, where continuity, calm, and gentle repetition persist as the true legacy of civilization.